Ladies and gentlemen, gamers, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about Relic's new map showcase. It was just hosted live on Twitch TV, but for any newcomers to the channel, I wait to watch these so I could record them with you guys. So we're going to be watching this in real time. They're going to be showing off a new 3v3 and 4v4 map that is supposed to come out in July. We don't know exactly when that will be, but without further ado, let's jump in.
So let's get into the footage. So quick caveats. We recorded this on a computer with a strange aspect ratio, so I had to crop it a little bit. But again, we're not really focused on the UI. We're really focused on the maps, so I think this should be good. Will, this is somewhat recognizable. I don't think it's a huge surprise which map this is. Can you talk about why we originally maybe released Benghazi to the workshop for Co3's launch, and then maybe the process to get it from where it was to officially bringing it into the map pool?
Yeah, sure. So Benghazi was an experiment. It was a task I took upon myself to test our map-making tools that we were giving to the community. When the decision was made that we'd be launching the map tools when the game came out, I wanted to make sure that everything worked from start to finish. So it seemed like a natural fit for me. I know all the steps. I hadn't had an opportunity to make a map entirely by myself since I joined Relic, so it seemed like a perfect opportunity. So this was the result. This was, I think, about 2 to 3 weeks worth of work to make Benghazi. Found very few bugs along the way, which is nice. And we had the idea to launch this with the workshop so that players knew that the workshop was up and running. If they wanted to, they could dig out this map and reverse engineer it, or it would be available for custom games.
Okay, so I wasn't aware of this, but this map has been in the workshop since launch, I guess. I've never seen this map before, Benghazi, so I'm curious if any of you guys have been playing on this map for the past couple months. Really love to hear your guys' feedback. I haven't played, but at first glance, there's a lot of buildings, which is cool. I think it will be cool if the pathing is improved, and I'm sure we're going to see some improved pathing. At least I hope we will. And it's a night map, right? But it's not super dark. It's not as dark as Winterline, I'm noticing. So very curious about that as well. But let's continue.
It was popular from the very start, so it seemed like a natural fit for us to eventually release it.
Yeah.
With a few zhuzhes and updates to make it prettier, because the artwork was unfortunately done by yours truly.
Yeah, I think folks called out that bug of that crowd shoots and kind of nosediving through the stairs there. Like I said, you will probably see a few bugs in this build that we were using as it was a very early version of the one that's coming in Emerald Bear. Will, we're watching from your perspective here, so I'm going to be hypercritical of the gameplay. Is there anything that you want to call out about the match in particular before we kind of talk more about the map?
I mean, we're watching my perspective, so take everything with a massive grain of salt. I am not a pro player. No, what we wanted to do was showcase the maps as much as we could. So we're playing with like the likes of Marco and Darren. So we have some very talented players on this team, and they were definitely reining it in. For our sakes while we were recording. But yeah,
going easy on us. I think I'm against you in this matchup, and let's just say I was distracted by some other chats and work things while I was playing. At least that's my excuse for why you're going to see me throw away some units. So Will, getting back to your work on this, I am very curious. When it comes to designing any map, what's your starting point here?
It actually changes. There's lots of different starting points depending on what we want to make. So, for example, if I'm doing it very much through making a map for the map pool that needs to fit a certain criteria, I will design it based on whether it needs to be competitive or casual. Or we might say we need an Africa map, so I will start looking at research into the conflict in North Africa. But this map, because it was very much mine on my own to start with, it came from where a lot of my old map ideas used to, and that was just from reading. I would read through
some interesting elevation, like right here. You can, of course, fire down, but you can't fire into the center here, the center road where the VP is. So that's at least nice, right? But I don't know how this play is going to interact here, this gameplay here between the staircase, the open road, and then, you know, tanks firing down and up. Elevation is tough. It's really tough. So it's very interesting to see that they're adding maps with elevation mechanics, and I hope that they can get that right this time. But let's continue.
Books on history or on culture, and these sort of stories would pop up. Benghazi was one that just endeared itself to me. I was reading through the Australian War Memorial Archives, and Benghazi came up. Found that interesting, dug a little deeper, and just got the itch to make a map.
Yeah, you're stealing my next question. I was going to ask you about like some of the historical inspiration for Benghazi, because I do know you are a huge fan of history. So can you maybe set up for players like what are the historical events here that maybe inspired this map, and what was actually happening here during the war?
Yeah, sure. So Benghazi is one of the lesser known, I suppose, North Africa conflicts. It changed hands 5 times, so it changed hands just about as much as the other port cities in North Africa did. But because it's so much further west than the likes of El Alamein or Tobruk, you don't tend to hear about it as much. It was an Italian colony, so it had lots of wealth in its architecture and its design, but it was bombed pretty much from the very start. So that's why we wanted to have this urban sprawl of a map, but with that early destruction, the notes of ruins and things already in there.
The map looks great.
It's a fascinating city to look at. When you look at it on the map, you think, well, they had to take this. This was one of those locations you can't just bypass, because the cities are so spread out on the North African coast, especially in Libya. You can't bypass this sort of place without expecting to get completely cut off.
Right.
So it's...
Can we talk about this cheeky play here?
So on every map that I make, I try to make little nook holes.
That's cool.
And the pier in this case is the little nook hole. Just hide away, repair your cred shoots, and then just pop back into action where they least expect you. Yeah, you chased him off, got him down to very little health. So I just gave him a little park up where he's got a nice view and break out the spanners.
Yeah,
it looks so good.
So
fighting
let's talk,
from building to building.
More about design. I am kind of curious. You know, what steps does a map need to go through to get it from that initial concept phase where you're reading history books and kind of plotting out, okay, how can I potentially bring this to life? So how do you go from that concept to, you know, doing some initial design work to us actually releasing a map, you know, in auto match?
Okay, so the official routine that we follow is mostly by committee to start with. So, as you mentioned, it'll start with a designer, such as myself, or Lisa, who designed some of our multiplayer maps, doing research on major areas of conflict. It could be a battle that took place, or it could be a choke point in the geography that we find interesting.
I love the lighting.
What we'll then do is do paper designs. So this will just be a drawing of the map, usually something like a territory layout or a basic cover and building layout. We'll present 3 of those, usually to our gameplay lead, to our art leads, and they will...
See, the nice thing here is at least, I know there's a building here and it's overlooking the staircase and the road down, but in terms of balance, at least there is an adjacent building on the other side, right? Or not adjacent, but at least there's a building opposite, so that both teams can take this garrison and this position if they want, right? Rather than there being one building in the center or one building here and no building here, right? So at least it's 1-to-1 here, and that's relatively balanced. I don't know in terms of gameplay, but I think that's an important thing to know.
Will make a firm decision on what they want to go forward with. Gameplay will obviously have things like layout, flow, scale in mind, and art will have asset design and visuals in mind. Bearing in mind that when we're doing these maps early in production, we don't necessarily have any of the assets that you can see in front of you. Everything from buildings to tables, market stands, vehicles, they won't exist yet. They will be what we call grey boxes.
Right.
So art, you need to be very cautious about what it is we want in this map, because it's going to be expensive to make too much. But we also want it to be varied and different from other maps that we're already planning to make. Once we get to that stage, though, usually we'll select one. The designer will build it. And from then on, it's a back and forth. It's a game of ping pong. The designer will do what we call a V1, like an early pass on the design, the roads, the buildings, the walls. And then it will go over to an artist. They will lay in the basic ground textures. They will start adding real assets in instead of grey boxes. And then we will take it back and playtest it and iterate upon it, make major changes if they're required.
But it looks really good.
Back to art again, and it does that until it's done. Basically, it swaps hands 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
With opportunities to make major adjustments early if we need to, but once it gets to a certain point and all the artwork is being locked in, it's mostly just playtesting, looking for bugs, things like that. That's the usual process. That's the norm for a brand new map. There are some exceptions to this. So the next map that we'll look at, which I won't spoil too much, is a case where I just have a little bit of time on my hands and I can do a bit of experimentation. So instead of going in front of a committee, I might build something that is just entirely of my own brain. It may never go anywhere because it's just not meeting the standards that we need. But sometimes it does. Sometimes something just pushes out. And that's a rarer case, but yeah, occasionally we might just skip the first few steps and get lucky.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Benghazi specifically. I know you mentioned some of those little hidey holes already, but like, what are some of the? I know players will have probably checked out some of this stuff in the when this was in the workshop. But from your perspective, what are some of the more notable features on Benghazi, or maybe what are some things that players may not have noticed, or maybe things that are a little bit less obvious?
Well, I'll start with the main points of the map. Usually what we do in the design of a competitive map especially is to focus on the central line. So like the furthest point from every player and where everything meets in the middle, that central line is where you want all of your key visuals and you want ideally the best gameplay, because that's where the most of the gameplay is going to occur. So in the south side, we've got the port, which is where we're looking at the moment. So it's got a nice open area around the VP, but then lots of nooks and crannies around the factories. You've got height gameplay from the retaining walls above that, where the courtyard is. So you're going to get quite a lot of aggressive battles here, trying to push through the road where you can, but AT guns and MGs will be your best friends. Towards the center of the map, we've got the marketplace and then the main street, which is where it's probably at its densest and most complex. The streets are all compact, the buildings are plentiful. But when the battle starts getting further and further underway, this area opens up dramatically. Buildings, when they collapse, become pathable. The walls, once they get knocked down, just open up more lanes of play. And then where we are now, this is towards the outskirts. This is towards the north of the map. So the buildings are weaker and smaller and fewer and further between. A little bit more room for maneuverability, and the roads to get through this area are a lot clearer. Fewer barricades, less cover.
Very interesting.
So easy to do those mechanized sweeps through the map. But otherwise, in terms of notables, because this is an urban map, we want lots of close engagements. We want there to be corners that you walk around and are surprised by what you find. So lots of blind spots that you might accidentally walk into. There are very few buildings on this map that don't have weaknesses. It's hard to hold a single building and not be breached or hit by flamethrowers and grenades because everything is so compact. So it's going to be a very aggressive close quarters map.
There's a new pathing.
I look forward to seeing how people play on it.
I like it.
I am enjoying the fact that you're just moving these L640s across the entire map, trying to harass wherever you can.
Seems like a large map.
This is actually a pretty lethal map for them because it's quite compact. Mines are just so deadly on this map. There are infantry-only paths between some of the buildings as well, very tight alleyways. So just laying S-mines or anything in those areas is just a guaranteed wipe in some cases.
Yeah,
but,
speaking of mines, I just see you playing like
just laying them down. But yeah, for light tanks like these L640s, it only takes one of them to accidentally trip a mine and they're just done for. But while I can, just running around and harassing, making a nuisance of myself.
Yeah, I see some folks, asking about some of the specifics in the footage that they're seeing here, and I mentioned it up top, but this this build that we're playing on is still a little bit older than what is going to be releasing in July with Emerald Bear. However, there's about 70-ish% of the gameplay and balance changes that the team is working on. So you will notice that some things have been improved. However, this won't be absolutely everything. So again, we're in a couple weeks from now, not exactly 2 weeks. I need to shift the date plus or minus a couple days, just based on some organization stuff. But we'll do a more in-depth gameplay and balance live stream with the team to sort of talk about those changes that are coming. But getting back to maps.
Okay, so based on what he's saying, 2 weeks they're going to showcase the updated version, full update, the maps and all that, balance changes. So that means we're not going to get Emerald Bear for at least 2 weeks. So I hope what they're going to do is they're going to release the update right after that live stream in 2 weeks. That seems like best case scenario for us. Otherwise, it's going to be probably a week later. So roughly 2 to 3 weeks before Emerald Bear.
I know we were just kind of talking about some of the infantry and vehicle gameplay and cutoffs and that sort of thing. When it comes to balance and design, I'm curious how you approach a map that is meant to be, quote, more competitive versus one that is maybe more co-op or social focused. What's your approach when you look at something like Benghazi versus Catania Crossing, which we released recently with Brass Leopard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How many stewards does this guy have?
The decision has to happen early. This is advice for anyone who's looking at making their own maps as well. Making a competitive map is something that should happen right at the very start. Go in with a plan of how to make a balanced map. If you, let's say for example, you want to convert some of our single-player missions into competitive maps, you might find that there's more work in doing that than is worth it.
Right.
Because the map itself isn't fundamentally designed to be fair. Like, you might not have central features like a road, you might not have buildings that are fair against each other in the same positions. You're making a lot of work for yourself. So if we're making a competitive map, or what we call in some cases a hybrid, which is competitively viable but still has some casual elements, like this map that has a lot of buildings in it, which wouldn't traditionally be considered hardcore competitive. You want to make sure that design is laid down very, very early. Same goes for casual maps. If you want to make a casual map, then it doesn't matter what sanctions you put on yourself, really. If you want to have bridges, you put bridges in. If you want unfair resources, it doesn't matter. Go in with the plan to have a fun casual map, and that is okay. But yeah, converting them after the fact is difficult and probably not worth doing.
Oh, you caught me not paying attention to my machine gun.
But yeah, so with competitive maps in general, you want to look for a good variety of territory points. With a large map like this, you want mostly low and medium points. You don't want to have high fuel points or high munitions points if you can help it, because they cause too much of a swing. If one team holds them, you basically have a 32 resource gain on your opponent. You want to try and have things like cutoffs, so strategic points that can deny resources. If you have them beyond the front lines, then it's a bit more of a challenge for you to die for them, gives you more of a reward when you get them as well. Look at maps like Road to Tunis or Twin Beaches for cutoff gameplay, and you'll see how we designed them. But otherwise, the best thing to make a more balanced map is just try to keep the cover balanced where you can. Don't use green cover on one player's side and yellow cover on the other. Try and keep it as fair as possible.
Exactly.
You'll tend to find, if you look through the workshop, for example, that's a lot of infantry.
It's a tactical formation.
There's John's blob.
If you look at the workshop, a lot of the maps that you'll see players making, if it's their first or second map, for example, will be basically mirror images of themselves.
Oh my God,
a central line
John.
right for the map, and it will be equal on both sides.
What are you doing?
That is perfectly fine. It's very, very functional. It's not our style, necessarily. What we've tried to do with the Company of Heroes franchise is have organic and realistic-looking environments. You can have balanced, but not necessarily mirrored environments. If you have a look at, say, classic Co-1 maps like Angoville, Semois, they aren't mirror images of themselves necessarily. They have unique features on the north or the south side of the maps that make them look different, but they are fair. For all
how many Stewarts are on the map right now? The mini map. That's ridiculous.
That takes a lot of experience and practice to get, but when you get there, it's rewarding.
I think this was our mission designer, David, going rampant with these Matildas, or sorry, with the Stewarts.
Yep.
And he was just like running them all over the map, causing chaos.
Yeah, my L640s are quaking in their boots right about now. I can't deal with you.
Yeah. So oh, you got the prune bar out. So let's talk about maybe some. I know you maybe touched on this earlier, but I'm curious what some of the notable updates have been to Benghazi since its initial release on the workshop. Like, what work did you have to sort of go through to take this from like an initial sort of something that you threw up on the workshop very quickly to being a finalized and like you're happy with it and it's ready to go into auto match?
I mean, the majority of the work that was done post-workshop was actually just artwork. We wanted to zhuzh it up a little bit, make it prettier, do what I couldn't do with my rudimentary skills. But the benefit of putting maps on the workshop, and this is a benefit that applies to any map on the workshop, is it's just a good forum for feedback. If you are very open and receptive to people leaving comments on your workshop items, you just get an idea of things that might not work. Maybe there's pathfinding issues, maybe there's flow issues, maybe something experimental that you've tried just simply hasn't worked. So I had a nice little list of minor changes I wanted to make, just in case this did end up going into the live game as it is.
Nice, John got out of there. Nice work.
So they were already implemented and ready to go into the workshop version. And then when we made the decision to take this map live, they went into the live version instead.
Okay. So at this point in the match here, what were you sort of thinking about?
I mean, I have a very bad build for a Stewart Rush. I have Martyrs, which are very easily flankable. So what I needed to do was get as much distance between me and them as possible and open some lanes. So I start crushing a load of walls down, just trying to open up the spaces. Like this marketplace in particular is where I'm probably going to end up making my stand. So I want to make sure I have good lanes of retreat. And just crush those walls to give me some better lines of fire. But most of my units have just been nuked by this point. I have very, very little left.
I think that you and I were both just like wiping each other off because we were focused on different things.
Yeah, I'm watching the north of the map very, very cautiously, thinking this is a perfect flanking route if Dave decides to do another massive Stewart charge. So yeah, I just needed to be ready. I knew I had a little bit of time because that many Stewarts need repairing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Well, this is kind of a follow up to one of my previous questions about some of the features on the map. But I'm kind of curious, like what are your favorite parts of this map when you're working on it or when you're playing it now after the fact? Like what are you excited for players to discover here? If they didn't get a chance to check this out while it was on the workshop.
So I love urban maps in general. They've always been a favorite of mine, and I understand why they fell out of grace in KO2 because there just simply weren't enough tools to deal with them. Almost the opposite is true now. There are so many tools to deal with buildings in KO3, from breach, grenades, flamethrowers. The amount of options that are available in every faction means that urban maps shouldn't be as problematic as they used to be. They're still going to be restricted.
Interesting note.
So many.
This is insane.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to see how people deal with urban problems with these city blocks. Something that players may not be aware of, we haven't highlighted it too well, and it's something that we are looking to actually develop soon, is whether buildings collapse and become permanent blockers when they're destroyed, or if buildings blow apart and become passable. So the way that we have it set up at the moment is heavy ordnance, so airstrikes, artillery, demolition charges will cause a building to blow apart when it's destroyed.
Jeez, man.
So the vast majority of buildings...
So the pathing does, I mean, if you guys are paying attention and noticing small pathing improvements, they are there. That mortar looked very slow, though. So I don't know if that's a change or not, but it did look really slow to me.
I believe are set up this way, in that once it's blown apart, it becomes heavy cover permanently, and units can path through it. So it no longer blocks sight, it no longer blocks movement. So if you are holding a specific position on this map and you want to open up a firing lane, drop artillery on a block of buildings and blow them apart, and use that sight line as you will. Alternatively, if you've got small arms or, say, anti-tank shells,
look how good the ground looks, the textures.
If they destroy buildings,
wind
the buildings
blowing
collapse in on themselves and become unpathable and sight blockers for the rest of the game. So you can use that to your advantage as well. Just have a squad with a flamethrower just attacking ground in the building if you don't want your enemy to use it. Or have an AT gun at max range, just knock out a building that you just don't want an enemy to set up an HMG. So you can deny as much as you can use buildings to your advantage.
Interesting. Okay. So I think the I think the Axis here have the VP advantage, but that Stuart Blob is just scary.
Expert gameplay aside, looking at that tank battle in the map and the textures and the lighting and just the graphics overall, it looks really good. Like, I'm really excited to play this map 3v3. I like how the south, the center, and the north are different. There are a lot of buildings, and as they said, it's not necessarily the most competitive in Company of Heroes history, having a lot of buildings, but I'm very curious to see how it plays, and I do like the map so far.
And this was a point where I think they realized he bit off more than he could chew, especially when he ran into a tiger.
Yeah. I think the Axis start to put up a bit of a fight here to slow things down. I know you were already talking about some of the strategies and tactics that players could deploy here. So what would your advice be for players on this map? Maybe some things that they haven't thought about, or maybe if I'm a new player coming to this map for the first time, what are some other strategies and tactics, or maybe even just advice that we could deploy here?
So as I mentioned, with urban gameplay, you're going to end up probably using.
Oh, that's interesting. Is the smoke a different color, or is that just the standard red? Can't tell.
Things like mines, flamethrowers, and grenades a lot more. Because there are blind corners, you can close distance on MGs in buildings or squads in buildings a lot easier than you can in open maps. So if you are a new player, especially coming to a map like this, I would suggest using buildings to your advantage where you can, but always protecting your flanks. Try and keep AT guns at maximum range as often as you can, and give them something to provide sight for them, like a scout squad or a Kettenkrad. But there are loads of opportunities here to also goad your enemy into choke points. There's lots of opportunity, even with a couple of tank traps, just closing off an entire street and forcing your enemy to take a more roundabout route. Planting mines in those frequently traveled high traffic areas is a very easy way of luring your enemy in.
So one thing that I noticed is, and it seems like they tend to do this lately, they have 1-star VP in the north, and then they have, instead of having one like directly in the center and one in the south, they have the 2 in the south, it seems. It doesn't seem like it's center. So I find that interesting because, of course, the emphasis is going to be in the south. So I don't know, from a gameplay standpoint, is Relic trying to incentivize more focus in the south and then larger flanks in the north? I don't know, but I find this an interesting decision from a map-making standpoint, and I'm curious what you guys think about that. Winterline is like the closest comparison, right? Of course, on a larger scale, but I find it interesting.
But we are mostly seeing gameplay in the urban area itself. We aren't seeing gameplay in the more open north because my camera is focused very much on the right here. I'm not doing a very good job of showing up the whole map. But yeah, in these tight urban areas, it's very much a case of use long range to your advantage where you can, and protect your flanks as best you can.
Something I didn't have in my notes, but I know we were talking about it offline, was about showcasing as many of our gameplay mechanics in maps as possible. I'm kind of curious if you can talk about that approach, or like when you're keeping those things in mind, or what that mindset is like when you're designing something like Benghazi.
Yeah, so in terms of like gameplay mechanics, we know that things like Breach is going to come up in urban maps, so having buildings in every map is a must for us to be able to keep gathering data and information on Breach and whether Breach works the way that we want it to. The same goes for some of the close-range weapons like flamethrowers and grenades. Are they priced right? Are they as accessible as they need to be? So having urban maps like this in the mix is important. But things like height gameplay also factors into that. Height gameplay might not be the most popular mechanic on some maps, especially the more competitive that you get. But we still want to ensure that we add it in at least 1 or 2 locations on a map so that we can keep on gathering data on whether it works. For example, if you say at the moment height gameplay negates cover completely, and we find that that is just simply too imbalanced, that gives us the data we need to start drawing those changes back. If we find certain parts of a map are just completely innavigable because of height gameplay, then that either means we need to develop the map or we need to change how height gameplay works.
Right.
For example, it's well known that on Winterline, one of our launch 4v4 maps, half of that map has unbalanced height gameplay. If you're on the west side of the map, you don't have a height disadvantage when you're approaching the fuel point, but if you're on the east side of the map, you do have a height disadvantage. So
unbalanced. Will, how could you do that?
I know, I'm terrible. But yeah, it's things like that. If we don't have these features in our maps, we can't gather data on them and we can't make things better. We don't want to end up with maps all playing identically. And when you look at, say, KOTOR, it's natural that over time, especially as competitive players hang around, we're going to end up with lots of maps that play very similarly to each other. One of the main, not to deviate too much, one of the main reasons why we went back to the company affair as one style of territory points with low, medium, and high resources is because a lot of KOTOR's maps ended up having the exact same resource layout. And it was hard to add or take away a point from a map without dramatically changing the balance of that map.
Right. Good point.
Because the economy was broken. Whereas the way that we have it at the moment, you could take out 2 low fuel points and add in 1 medium and change the dynamic of a map quite dramatically without breaking the economy. So it gives us a lot more freedom.
Okay. And I think we can talk about territory layout and some of that other stuff. I saw some questions about building types and in the chat, but not to. I don't want to spoil anything, but just to quickly tease. I think as we see some fun explosions here.
Those explosions look better to me, to be honest.
I think, Will, you and I are working on some fun videos or a video series in the future that would be interesting to some of our modders and map makers out there.
Yes, absolutely.
So we'll have more news about that hopefully in the future. So this
my tractor.
Poor tractor. So again, a lot of people are calling out some of the gameplay changes that they're seeing here, and again, a couple weeks we'll chat more in depth about those things. I know people are excited to see this sneak peek. So this match is, it's going back and forth. I feel like we spent a lot of time here throwing units at each other. What's your strategy right now? It looks like you got your Flak 36 down, and the map is quite a bit of a wreck.
Yeah, my population is just getting lower and lower. I don't know if we would have seen it, but we talked over it. I got hit by the British Air and Seas naval bombardment. I got hit very hard by a lot of artillery, so I am kind of struggling here. Manpower is low, fuel is okay. I need infantry. But there's that black and wizened tiger just roaming around the map now, just making itself known.
What do you think, Will? We're just almost coming up on 40 minutes here in the stream. Do you want to jump into the 4v4, or do you want to see how this plays out?
Yeah, I think we can jump on over.
Okay,
we've seen as much as we can see of the map.
Spoilers: the Axis win. Okay, let's get right into it. So that was a lot of fun. Let's jump into our 4v4. And again, this is a never-before-seen map. This is going to be brand new, coming in Emerald Bear later.
Very excited about the 4v4 map.
Let's jump over and take a look. Will, do you want to set this up? Do you want to introduce what this map is?
Sure.
Very cool.
So this is a completely brand new map. This is called Monte Carlo. It is a 4v4 map. It's going to be available, as we mentioned earlier, in all game modes. So auto match versus AI, custom games. It is
so exciting, man. I'm so pumped for this
map. It is very much reminiscent of your Hill 331, Hill 400.
Interesting. Okay.
And of course, 'cause
More
it's 4v4,
elevation.
it's utter chaos.
Yeah, and it's a night map.
It is a night map. Yes,
So
we
cool,
couldn't
man. Look at
resist.
that. Spotlights.
Yeah, it's been very, very nice playing around with the atmospheres now that we have a little bit more time to hone them and hone the visuals of the maps. So yeah, nighttime maps are good fun. Good to see them back.
Amazing. So yeah, is there any other sort of notes that you want to talk about, or maybe we can just sort of get into the inspiration behind Monte Carlo?
Yeah, let's jump into the story behind it. So Monte Carlo's not really a well-known battle at all. Mostly because it's the mountain range isn't known as Monte Carlo. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Monte Carlo just means something like Cable Mountain. It was a listening post. It was a listening and observation post that the Germans held on top of the mountain. It's a very similar story in a way to Monte Cassino in that the building on the top of the mountain was a monastery, but it was converted into a hotel, then converted for military purposes. So in the center of this map, we have this military compound, this listening post, which is
awesome.
all lit up and glistening, surrounded by
Elevation.
forests and outcroppings and rockery. But this was one of the last mountains on the Caesar line. So this is after the Winter Line fell. It was the last defensive mountain before Rome. So it isn't really well heard because by this point we were already gearing up for the battles of Normandy and war correspondence wasn't really happening in Italy at that point. But still,
I'm not aware of this specific scenario in military history, but it's really cool to hear that they're designing the map around that and they have the context and they're referencing it. I personally love that. I'm going to look into this specific, but yeah, really cool.
still an impressive story, an impressive fight all the same. Just defending those mountaintops from advancing Americans in this case.
So do you maybe want to talk about like the lineage of this style of map in the franchise? Like where does what does this map sort of harken back to in Co 1 and Co 2?
Yeah, so Hill 331 is the
big one. Yeah.
the big old punch in the fields for those who played Co 1. Not as big as 331. 331 was a massive map. But the idea is to have the center of the map be this hilltop, this very defensible position. But the outskirts of the map can starve it. Okay. So if you neglect the center of the map and you let your enemy take it, it isn't the end of the game. You can skirt around onto the lower ground. You can cut them off from their HQ pretty easily just by diving deep. It's mostly about control of the roads around the map rather than the summit of the map itself, or I should say the compound of the map itself. This was an absolute joy to work on, and this is actually one of those maps, as we mentioned earlier, where we didn't follow the normal routine. There was no discussion around this map. This was actually an old idea of mine that I wanted to experiment with. I wanted to see how height gameplay, hills, and everything worked. So I made this as an experiment.
Okay.
And it just picked up some traction. Not enough traction for it to make it into the game at launch. We didn't have the resources or the artists at the time to do so. But it made it so that it was next on the list, second on the list, really, to make it into the game once we went live. Yeah.
I know you were talking about some of the elevation and how that central sort of compound is sort of the high point that everyone's sort of fighting over. Isn't there a little bit of elevation on the sides of the map as well?
Yes, yeah, not as much. More of the gradual slopes coming from the HQs up to the center of the map. What we've tried to do where we can is where we want height gameplay to be a major factor, we would put things like cliffs in. We would put some impassable terrain so that you can visually see that there is a big height difference here.
I think it's really cool. Like he's saying, there's this cliff here, and you could tell it's the high ground. But as you're coming out of your base, if you look at the minimap and you're coming up, you really feel like you're taking this, uphill path up this hill, and then you got to get over the cliff to get to the top, the center that runs across the middle of the map. So I like that. I think that's really cool. And then, as Will stated, you could go along these side roads, cut them off, make some flanking maneuvers. You don't necessarily need to take this hill, according to them, to gain advantageous positions, but it is an option strategically, objectively. So yeah, I do like the whole theme of it, especially at nighttime. And considering there's a compound in the center with spotlights, if you can take that position, I'm sure it's a good defensive position to have. But yeah, love the map so far.
So, for example, this MG fighting up against these Panzer Grenadiers, there's no height gameplay there. There's not a big enough height difference. But when you are going from there up those stairs into the compound, there is a height gameplay difference.
Gotcha. So I know you were talking about like experimenting with this map and some of the initial work on it. So was this the type of thing that you spent a lot of time on over the last few months, or because I know you were saying it wasn't quite ready for launch. So what did that sort of process look like from the time that we launched Company of Heroes 3 to now having it ready to go?
Yeah, it's strange. Like, a lot of my time once we launched the game was fixing bugs. So a lot of the maps that we see now and that we'll probably be seeing in the future are maps that I built back in, say, 2022.
Okay.
What we found with our project in particular is that artists were required for so many other things that I was left in some cases to start preparing things for the live game. So getting some basic concepts in. So we have a backlog of designed maps that we will revisit. We'll see if they're worth keeping or if they're just kept as experiments.
Gotcha.
But we have a whole slew, a wide variety of different maps that we can kind of pick and choose from, and then when we find one that we like, we'll develop it further. But yeah, this was just an example of one of those that piqued interest enough that we thought, yeah, we'll fast track this and get it out there.
Okay, so let's dive into more of like the notable features here on this map. So I know we kind of talked about it sort of at a higher level, with the central point, some elevation throughout. What are some of the more notable features, I guess, on Monte Cavo? Like let's get into some of the minutia about the things that you've designed, or maybe it's around the victory points or resource layout. But just what are the those notables, I guess, that we can get into?
So this is a map that breaks convention a little bit. We still stuck to the same rules in that the central line is where the most important stuff happens. So the south here that you can see, this is the checkpoint. This is the very southernmost area of the map where there's decent resources, there's a VP to hold, but it is very exposed. There's only forest really around you, a couple of tank traps and some sandbags to begin with, but they clear out pretty quick. But to either side of them, there's very little other than forest and roads.
Right.
Because we want to draw your attention towards the center. We don't necessarily want to overdress those areas. So we're using light as well as a way of drawing you towards certain parts of the map where we want you to be.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things, and we showcased this in one of our teaser images, the last stream that we did, is the floodlights and the spotlights that you use throughout the map. I'm wondering if you can maybe touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they're easy to trigger in the editor to turn on. If you just set the atmosphere to be nighttime, the lights can pop on. But as I mentioned, we're using these to draw your attention towards the most important areas. We've also put little ambient lights, like soft cell lights, under the capture points themselves.
I noticed that.
So
That's
they
cool.
stand out in the gloom.
Okay.
But otherwise, it's an intentional decision to try and draw you up the map, up the hill towards the top.
Right.
So it looks well defended, and it looks like this is better cover. This is where I need to be. This is important.
And so those, I think we just saw it there, but like all of those gates, I think vehicles can crush, or is it just heavy crush, or?
Yeah. So all the fences and gates, that is all light crush.
Light crush. Okay.
So if you wanted to get into the compound early and just go and knock all those fences down with a Kradschützen or a half-track, you can do. That's no trouble at all.
Okay.
Because it looks like it's quite dense and there's a lot of cover, but it clears out very, very fast.
Okay, gotcha. So we talked about some of the notables there. Like, do you have any specific like favorite features on this map? Like things that you're just like overjoyed to be like adding in or working on as you were going through?
I mean, the compound itself is definitely my favorite part of the map. I'm always happy when I am the middle player, and I have to try and hold down the compound as long as I can. But again, like the idea of the central line being the main focus here means that most of my details that I wanted to have in there are down that central line. We've mentioned the checkpoint in the south, the compound in the middle. We haven't really seen much of the summit to the north yet. We will hopefully get some time looking at that later. But If I recall rightly, I'm playing against Marco here, and he is stomping on it.
Just not holding back.
Yeah, he's not holding back. He's telling me he is, and he's smiling at me. But yeah, it's a wicked smile. But the summit is lots of rockery and cliffs. More challenging to take once it's being held and defended, but a lot easier to cut off. One of those more important roads that you need to hold rather than the resources themselves.
Someone in the chat was asking if things like the lights or like the floodlights are destructible.
They are, yes. They all get wiped out eventually, which is why we've kept those soft lights on the capture points, so they always show up a little bit.
Interesting.
I don't actually recall if there is an atmosphere transition on this map. I don't believe there is. There used to be a transition where it would go from night to day, but we wanted to have this be a nice standalone map that is just always nighttime.
Oh, don't.
Curious to hear what you guys think. Would you guys prefer an atmosphere transition, so starting nighttime and then slowly becomes day? Or do you like the map to be strictly night map or strictly day map? Really curious to hear your guys' preference there.
Tease us, Will. Come on.
But transitions are something that we put into a lot of our maps. They're very, very subtle. Like Twin Beaches, for example, does go from dawn to day.
Okay.
So you barely notice it. It starts almost like a salmon pink color and then goes into more of a yellows.
Okay.
But yeah, we like experimenting with atmospheres. It's a fun thing to do on maps.
And I imagine we'll do more of that in the future as well.
Definitely, yeah.
So those central buildings, I know we're not looking at them right now, but I saw another question in the chat about, which buildings can be flattened and which ones can we fight on. Is that entire central compound can you completely level it, or how is that designed?
I believe so, yes. There may be some exception with those watchtowers, the small square watchtowers, but every other building in that central compound can be completely flattened. But you just have to make sure you're using heavy ordnance on it and not something like anti-tank or flamethrowers. They would cause it to collapse and become a blocker. But again, you can do that based on what you need from the situation. If you want to create sight lines or kind of lure your enemy into blind spots, then knock them down early and make them impassable. But
really
otherwise, yeah, an airstrike can flatten that area pretty nicely.
Right. So what are you I'm playing in the middle here. I can't remember who I was fighting against. Oh, actually I do remember. I was fighting against Jason, and he was kind of kicking my teeth in a little bit here. But what's your sort of plan of attack here? I know you're having a tough time versus Marco. So how are you trying to go toe to toe with him here?
I'm holding on for dear life, hoping that somebody else does the war for me. I need the center and the north to win, and I will just hold on for dear life. But it looks like at this time we've lost the north. We still hold the northern VP, but the resources are starting to fall. The central compound is also starting to fall, so it's on me, and I don't like that. And I'm not coping.
Yeah. So let's really talk about some of the strategies and tactics that players can employ here. What's some advice that you give to people that are going to be approaching this map for the first time when it releases? What's the best way for maybe the Axis or the Allies to think about this map or to come at this map?
So something you will definitely notice as soon as you play it is, because it's a 4v4 map, it's a big map. There's quite a lot of distance between your HQ and the central line. It's no bigger than, say, Mignano Gap, which is our launch 4v4 map. It's smaller than Winterline as well. But the use of transports, half-tracks, or even something as small as the Weasel is going to be a very useful way of getting to where you need to be as fast as possible. One of the early reasons why we made this map was also to experiment with towing. We wanted to see whether towing was a viable way of getting team weapons up to the front lines, and it is. The DAC, especially on this map, have the advantage of just being able to wheel up their LEIGs or their AT guns straight to the front line where they need it without having to worry about lugging them uphill.
That's so cool.
So yeah, if this is your first time on the map, mobility and transport is going to be very, very useful for you in order to keep a footing. But one of the main reasons why we have 4v4 maps being the size that they are, we don't want a mass retreat to not be valuable to your opponent. We want your opponent to be able to take some ground when they cause a retreat. So that's why we go for these distances. Although, fun fact, this was originally going to be a 3v3 map. if I'm
Oh, interesting.
not mistaken. And then when we play tested it, it's one of those rare cases where the scale just felt better as a 4v4.
Okay. And I'm guessing that's just one of those things that can only be discovered through some of our internal playtesting.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Does that happen often, where you think like, okay, this is gonna be a 2v2 or this is gonna be a 3v3, and then by the time we go through playtesting, that's changed, or is that sort of a rare occurrence?
It's very rare,
Okay.
very very rare indeed. Because scale is one of the hardest things to grasp when you're making a map, and I do appreciate for any of our community who are making their maps the first times, scale is probably what you'll get wrong. Because you're looking at a blank canvas with no reference of how big tanks are, or how big infantry are, how wide roads should be. So getting the scale right is just such a task. So when we were making this map, I was looking at the scale of existing Co 1 and Co 2 maps and thinking, okay, yeah, I'll use some of those as a starting point. And then it just felt too big.
Right.
So adding another 2 players in there is a good way of plugging that gap.
Oh, there's a fun cosmetic bug.
Yes. So the new lighting has caused a bug with stowage on some vehicles.
Yeah, like I said, folks, if you're just tuning in, this is a bit of an earlier build for the Emerald Bear update that's going to be coming in later in July. So it's only got about 70-ish% of the gameplay changes that we want, and you will notice a few bugs here and there, but those should all be ironed out by the time we release.
Yeah, if for those who are interested, that's caused by LUTs.
Okay.
So when we're lighting a map, we can choose the sunlight color, we can choose the fog color, we can do all sorts of things with the actual visuals of the map, like what reflections do you want on the map, what sunlight angle do you want. But the unit lighting is often handled by LUTs, which are a completely separate setting. So if you wanted to have your infantry stand out even more, you can have brighter LUTs on them. And the very bright stowage that you saw on those tanks is because it's defaulted to a very daytime Italian lighting scene. Instead of very, very dark nighttime mountain.
Right. So it's very.
There's the same bug right there.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Okay, so it looks like you've got the axis on the back foot here.
I mean, speak for yourself.
I just know I was having a tough time in the center. So I lost my train of thought here. Oh yes, I was going to ask. I feel like this is maybe an important point where we can kind of touch on this, because you are Relic's or Company of Heroes' primary map maker right now. You know, there have been a lot of questions about integrating community maps. I know we haven't really. We're not ready to talk about that just yet. We know players want to see it, but I'm kind of curious, because the comment I see a lot is just like, oh, it's easy. You can do it overnight. So I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that without maybe giving away, you know, too many of the specifics, and talking about some of our things that we're trying to work on right now.
Yeah, so it's not the happiest of topics, but in every games community, there's going to be bad actors. There are going to be people who might be abusive, even if they recognize or realize that they are or not. And the same goes for people who make community content. So whether you're making skins, you're making units, you're making maps, it doesn't really matter. There are bad actors that can leave a very bitter taste in the mouth for the people who do that sort of work. They're usually doing it in their spare time and off the sweat of their brows. So we want to make sure that we're looking after those people where we can.
Right.
And we know that there's a past of abuse within our community that, you know, we're dealing with as best we can, but it happens everywhere. So before we can even consider community maps, we want to make sure that integrating somebody's work isn't going to leave them victimized in any way. So that's our main concern. That's our forefront. Yes, you might think that it's easy to integrate content, but we want to make sure that we're protecting the content creator.
Yeah, and I imagine the other thing that we're working on is potentially like, okay, if we were to try to bring over community maps, we'd have to come up with some sort of pipeline for that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. This can't be something that we just do once and not set up. We need to make sure that we can do it fast, efficiently.
Is this smoke? I saw this in the last map, the 3v3 map. Is this smoke color different, or is it just me? Because it looks like a different color. I'm curious if it's based on the unique color of the player, or I'm just losing my mind here. I don't know. it seems like the smoke is different in this update.
Because if we're doing it, we might as well do it wholesale. We might as well bring in as many maps as we can, rotate them in and out often, and make sure there's a nice pipeline for feedback, because inevitably, once a map goes live, the community will have feedback for it.
Right.
The Allies retook the center. That's
we don't have anything
cool
to announce yet. We know players want to see that. We want to see that. But we're still kind of in that phase where we're planning and mapping a lot of things out. So we don't have any sort of specifics or timeline on that. But it is something that we are talking about regularly. I imagine, Will, you're in a lot of meetings about this right now.
Yes, yeah, and naturally I'm watching the workshop very closely. There's a lot of content I'm very interested in. I love some of the stuff that's already been made. And the 4v4 map competition that wrapped up recently had some great results. I mean, considering the game came out at the end of February, our community has done amazing work in getting some content out there.
Yeah.
We have some very, very devoted players.
Yeah, shout out to the Grey Shop map making contest. Those were really great, and I know there are a lot of really cool maps that are being integrated in the Master League as well.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting to the midpoint, or sort of near the end point of this match, and I don't want to keep folks here too long, Will. I know you got other things to get to, but do you have any sort of like final thoughts about this map as we kind of wrap things up, or as we sort of see this match progress? Do you have any final comments on Monte Carlo here?
Actually, yeah, I have a kind of a thought in that if you find any problems with any maps, don't be afraid to come forward and tell us. We have all of our public channels, we have our Discord, there are loads of places for you to come forward and say, not a fan of this. We are always receptive to feedback. And we know that we don't make things perfect first time, because you can't. In order to test this map, for example, you need 8 designers available to do it. So we are gonna miss some things. So if you spot anything with either this or Benghazi when they come out, don't hesitate to tell us. We are.
I love the north of this map. It looks so cool up here.
We're not launching things that we have no intention of ever changing.
Right.
We want to keep.
It seems like it on the south side, and of course I haven't played this, so I don't know if this is actually true. It seems like it's lower elevation, and it seems like if you were to be in the south and move up the map, it seems like it gets progressively higher in elevation. I don't know if that could be completely wrong. But of course, when you start here, you're going up to the center, and it seems like as you're coming up to the north, it's even higher. But yeah, it's hard to tell. But what I do love about this map, it reminds me of several maps in the past, as they stated earlier. But like Hill 400, for example, yeah, you're coming up the hill, but there's not really that elevation mechanic, and the center is relatively open. There's not a lot of garrison, or there's not a town or compound like there is on this map. So I feel like objectively, strategically, taking the center of the map has a lot more implications, and it really gives roles to players. Like there's 4 players here. Naturally, one might go north, one might go south, 2 are going to go center. And there's like a really cool kind of objective that takes place where there's a struggle in the center, like a tug of war. And then the flanks, players can choose to facilitate those flanks or not. But unlike Hill 400, when you're coming up as a center player to try and acquire this town and this compound, like there's a lot more to work with. There's a lot more buildings, a lot more defensive positions, crushing barbed wire, setting up mines. There's a lot more to do. And just thinking about like hauling artillery up the hill and firing up, trying to, push them out of the town. I just think the theme of this map overall is a lot cooler, and I'm really excited to play it.
This going for as long as we can, and that includes balance changes and fixes to maps, and just in the same way that we balance units. Yeah, so don't keep feedback quiet.
Yeah, and we also have a web form through the support website, which is probably the best way to track feedback, so you can fill that out and submit it, whether it's a bug or just general feedback, or if you need technical support, so you can find that as well. Yeah, having played this map a few times, I really love it. I'm a big fan of big 4v4 maps. I'm hoping players are excited to check this out when it launches with Emerald Bear. Yeah, any other sort of final thoughts about Monte Carlo itself, and in terms of like the work that went into it, and maybe what are some things that you're excited for players to check out on Monte Cavo itself.
You got a flank up in the north now.
I am very intrigued to see how vehicle gameplay turns out on this map. At the moment, at the stage.
Vehicle gameplay looks tough in the center, to be honest. I mean, it's relatively nice if you've taken the center and you have that little high ground advantage up here, as you can see. It's still hard to maneuver, but down here seems tough. But I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
The match that we're in, infantry is still very prominent. Team weapons, AT guns, HMGs still very prominent. But because of the amount of open spaces around the complex itself, and because most of the assets that we're looking at here are trees, everything is crushable apart from the cliffs themselves.
That's interesting.
So when we get into more of the later game, the heavy tanks rolling out, or just the huge mechanized pushes, this map is going to change a lot. And we're going to end up with a lot of empty spaces where there used to be forest and there is no longer very much at all. So I really am intrigued to see as many games on this as I can. I want to see how it shapes out. I'm hoping that we won't just see every single fight devolve into a scrap over the center, because it's not actually worth that much. The resources in the center are slim pickings compared to what's around the rest of the map.
Okay.
But your eye is drawn there on purpose because it is the visual focus of the map.
That's a good tip, because I do find myself gravitating towards it. So I'll keep that in mind for my future games. So I think that might be a good place to wrap things up. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. So that's going to be it for this stream today. Like I said, we're going to be doing a stream in up 2-ish weeks, 2 weeks, and give or take a couple days.
Okay.
Where we're going to specifically focus on the balance and gameplay changes that are coming in Emerald Bear or 1.2. So look forward to that. We'll have more news on that soon. Again, if you want to stay up to date on everything Company of Heroes, follow us at Company of Heroes on your...
All right, guys. So I love the maps. I think I like the 4v4 map more. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you like the 3v3 or the 4v4 map more? I personally am really excited to play in the 4v4 map with the Sarge squad. And the Discord is online, guys. If you want to join, you can join. You'll see it on the banner page on the YouTube channel. And I would love to be cycling in some of you guys for some team games once Emerald Bear hits. So, of course, that's going to vary. I'm not always going to be able to set up some games with subscribers, but keep an eye out in the Discord. I might be, from time to time posting, hey, need 2 players. Hey, I need 3 players. And I would love to get you guys on and see if we can play some games online. So really excited about maps for an RTS game. It's really maps that shake up the gameplay the most, and you need a lot of maps. We don't have very many, and I'm really happy to see that they're high quality, especially the 4v4 map. I think the theme and overall design is really, really exciting. And unfortunately, we're not going to get this next week. I was really hoping for the first week of July for Emerald Bear, but it looks like we're going to have the developer stream in 2 weeks, according to John, and I hope they'll just launch it live after that dev stream. Worst case scenario, it seems like it will come a week later. I can't imagine it coming at the very end of July. That would be too long in my opinion. So 2 to 3 weeks, but very exciting. Guys, if you did enjoy this video, go ahead and smash the like button, leave a comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about this Emerald Bear overall in the maps, and I'll see you guys on the next one.